Today marks the centenary of a bloody event that occurred during the course of the War of Independence in Tipperary. On the 4th of July 1920, 100 years ago today, Richard Lumley was shot dead on the bridge at Holycross. And here's a map of the village of Holycross, and it gives a general outline of where this event happened and other areas relating to that event. And we can see here the river Sugar and the Abbey Inn, the premises of Martin Ryan. Here is the public house of Statham's Public House. We see here the ruin, as it was then, of the now restored Abbey. Here we have the road to Cashel, and it was out this road about 1 mile was the local RIC barracks. And here is the road that would take you to Castlefogarty and Thurles, and it was on this road that reinforcements came when they became aware of the attack on the barracks here at Holycross. So, who was this Richard Lumley? And a report in the paper at the time said that the deceased was a native of West Cork. That's not entirely true. He was from Cork City, from that Dillon's Cross, Old Yall Road area of Cork City. And you can see here in the census of 1911, he was working with John Dunn in Galberstown, farmer John Dunn. And his place of origin is correctly given as Cork City. He worked in the Holycross area for in about 30 years, so he was well known in the area, he was. And he was described at his inquest as a wandering labourer, and rather uncharitably, as he was said to be of weak mind. And in 1916 he was, before the petty sessions in Thurles, at the behest of Constable Michael Muldoon for being drunk in the streets in Thurles. Of course, we cannot say for certain that he was drunk. That would depend on how officious an individual Constable Michael Muldoon was. A lot of these constables, they took rather delight in persecuting people as well as prosecuting them. On the 3rd of July, the day prior to his death, he was working with Martin Ryan, the proprietor of the Abbey Hotel. And during the day he went to confession, and he had intended to go to Holy Communion the following day on Sunday. On that day also, his neighbour across the bridge, Anastasia Stakelum, died, having been ill for 3 months. And here we can see in the picture the bridge at Holycross, where in this area where Richard Lumley was killed. Here in the background we can see what's now the Abbey Tavern, what was then the Abbey Hotel. And here in this area stood Statham's Public House. The context of all of this, of course, is within the context of the War of Independence as it unfolded in mid-Tipperary. And the barracks in Holycross was subjected to an attack in the month of February, and now on the 2nd of July it was subjected to a second attack. And the barracks was defended by a garrison of 8 men under the command of Sergeant Gagan. The reports at the time said about 300 men being involved in the attack in the barracks, and that would be certainly widely exaggerated. The garrison fired virulence to attract the attention of the nearby garrisons in Cashel and Thurles. so help would come to their relief. The military assistance came from both Cashel and Thurles, and they came by lorry, and also a bicycle detachment came from nearby Castle Fogarty. The official version of what happened stated simply that at 2 a.m. on the 4th of July, an attack occurred on Holycross barracks. I said about a relief party from Thurles coming. They met a roadblock near the Abbey, and an ambush took place, and in the exchange of fire, one of the attackers was killed. That attacker would have been Richard Lumley. But what did really happen? Richard Lumley finished his day's work with Martin Ryan at the Abbey Inn, and at 10:30 he left to go to the wake of Anastasia Stakelum, to cross the bridge to Stakelum's public house to attend the wake. He left the wake at 2 o'clock, 2 a.m, said to get some fresh air, and he did intend to return because he left his hat in the house after him. He went out and he stood on the bridge, and by standing on the bridge he was shot dead. The report said that his body was riddled with bullets, slightly exaggerated, because Dr. Jackman, in his testimony to the inquest, said that there was 3 bullet wounds on the body. The military alerted Martin Ryan in his house and asked him to identify the remains of Richard Lumley. He identified the remains of Richard Lumley. The body was placed in the adjacent mill overnight. The day after, a wake was held for the dead man, and on the following day he was buried within the walls of the ruined abbey in Holycross. And the breastplate on the coffin read, "Richard Lumley, 60 years old, murdered by British hirelings." The inquest begins on Monday the 5th of July, and straight away controversy or contention arose. Mr. Wall, being the local man of substance, a good old Church of Ireland stock from County Armagh, was selected by Dr. Fennelly, the coroner, to be foreman of the jury. But the members of the jury vehemently objected to this, and John Ryan was elected to serve as foreman in his stead. John Carrigan, the solicitor from Thurles, and William Skinner, King's Counsel, represented the next of kin. County Inspector Robert Dunlop and Michael Gleeson, County Solicitor, represented the case for the Crown. Martin Ryan gave some cursory evidences to the identification of the body to the inquest, and then it was adjourned for 1 week, and it resumed again on Monday the 12th of July. The jury that was in panel consisted of John Ryan was the foreman, and Mr. Fitzgerald Wall, Coleman, Thomas Hayes, Edward Dunn, Michael Ryan, William Field and Thomas Fogarty, Richard Long, Patrick Fanning, John Long, Daniel Fogarty, William Fogarty, Andrew Hayes and James Butler. And these were the men who were entrusted to determine the cause of death of Richard Lumley. Martin Ryan was the first to give evidence, and he gave evidence of identifying the remains of the dead man. He also swore evidence about his premises being held under sustained gunfire for a period of time and damage being done to his shop. Dr. Jackman, in his evidence, said about the three gunshot wounds, and also said that one of those was to the skull, to the brain, and that Richard Lumley died instantly. Michael Shannon, who was at the wake, he swore about the wake house being held under sustained gunfire, and the lights being put out and people lying on the floor for their protection. And John Ryan, he swore similarly about the gunfire and also bullets coming through the back door of the house. Robert Stakelum, brother of the deceased woman, Anastasia Stakelum, he gave his testimony. He swore that at a break in the gunfire, a knock came to the door. When he answered the knock on the door, he was confronted by an officer in charge of the raiding party, and he told the officer in charge that there was a wake in the house, to which the officer replied that they'd heard that excuse plenty of times before, but then when he saw the remains of the dead woman, he apologised. Second Lieutenant Gordon Fullerton was then cross-examined, and Fullerton was the man in charge of the bicycle patrol from Castle Fogarty. And strangely, for a man in charge of such a deadly patrol, fully armed, he was only 19 years of age. And discrepancies began to appear very quickly in his evidence. And at one stage, John Carrigan, solicitor, began to lose patience with him, and he put it to Fullerton that he had been coached in what evidence to give to the inquiry. However, Fullerton refuted this, and that line of questioning got nowhere. But it was pretty obvious that something not correct was happening, that the evidence was not presented truthfully as it should have been. Fullerton gave the evidence as if it were that the fatal shots were fired by the motorised patrol from Thurles. But strangely enough, no witnesses from either the Cashel or Thurles military patrols were subpoenaed to give evidence to the inquest. An ex-soldier, John Ryan, he swore that at 3 o'clock he left the wake house and to go home, and he was taken prisoner. He was threatened, and he was badly beaten. John Barrett, an ex-constable of the RIC, also gave evidence about being threatened. Hannah Dorn, who lived in the village, had a house in the village, she also swore about her house being subjected to gunfire. And strangely enough, on the previous day, Hannah Dorn's son John, was the last of the Wormwood Scrubs prisoners to come off hunger strike. Jimmy Hayes left the house after 3 o'clock, and he was taken prisoner, and he was cavalierly invited by one of the soldiers to identify his chum, and only for the fact that he was acquainted with one of the regular RIC men from Thurles, he would have been badly beaten. The verdict delivered in the Richard Lumley inquest followed what had now become a pattern of the verdicts in these types of situations. And the jury found that the deceased was willfully murdered by members of the police and military forces. They expressed horror and indignation at the dastardly outrage, also at the conduct of the police and military firing into a house without any provocation. And the jury also condemned the Castle's official report of the occurrence as a baseless lie. This was to follow the pattern of verdicts, of coroner's inquest verdicts that was seen in the inquest into the killing of Wallace and Enright in Knocklang, that inquest in Kilmallock, the inquest into the killing of Lord Mayor of Cork, Thomas McCurtain, the inquest into the killing of Gorty McCarthy in Thurles, and also the killing of Tom Dwyer at the Rag. These verdicts were very damning of the authorities and laid the blame firmly at their door. The last reference to Richard Lumley comes in February 1924, when his sister Catherine Bowman, and Mary Lumley, they filed a claim for compensation. It is unlikely that this claim would have met with any degree of success, as Richard Lumley was scarce in a position to have much financial support to either of his sisters. Mary Lumley was to die the following September of 1924, and Catherine Bowman lived on until April of 1930. In conclusion to all of this, and to give some meaning to the incident that claimed the life of Richard Lumley and the fallout from it, the War of Independence, as it was to become known in time, had by July of 1920 deteriorated into what could be described as outrage followed by reprisal, IRA outrage followed by Crown Force reprisal. These damning verdicts for the jury inquest had proved to be a huge propaganda boost for the IRA, because they were printed in the papers nationally and also internationally, but also various MPs stood up in the Houses of Parliament and questioned these incidents that were happening in Ireland. And on numerous occasions, the Under Secretary Ian McPherson was forced to read verbatim the returned verdicts of these inquest juries. Such deeds as the killing of Richard Lumley did not sit well with many of the traditional RSE men of the older order. They had joined the force, mostly for economic reasons. Many came from the west of Ireland, from small farms, and it was a good pensionable job and a secure job. And while they might have been happy enough to deal with stray animals and drunk and disorderly, they were not equipped or inclined for political policing, and they certainly, many of them did not want to take any part in the deaths of their fellow Irishmen. And this was to lead to widespread resignations. Many policemen resigned because of intimidation, but many also resigned because they felt that they were doing a job that they were not equipped to do, that they did not want to do, that they did not relish doing. And John Barrett, who gave evidence to the Lumley inquest, he had resigned from the police actually on that day. And he was from Ballineen in West Cork, and his two brothers also resigned because they did not want to carry out certain orders that were being given to the police, and that would have been namely to use lethal force on their own countrymen. All of this, of course, was to find its way into local papers, and then in the press overseas, in America, but mostly in England. And these reports, the daily reports of these shocking stories of summary killings and reprisals, did not sit well with the British public, and in time it was to help sway that course of international opinion behind finding a settlement to the situation in Ireland. And Richard Lumley was killed on the bridge in Holycross. He was waked, he was buried within the ruins of the Abbey, and he was forgotten. And I suppose as we're now in the centenary of the height of the War of Independence, and we maybe think what we remember, what we commemorate, and perhaps it's an opportune time to remember that long forgotten unarmed civilian. There was no shots fired over the grave of Richard Lumley, or there was no oration given, but his loss was felt by those who knew him, those who were close to him, perhaps his family in Cork. Whatever, the course of the War of Independence was to interfere in the life of the 60-year-old Cork City native, and for the simple action of going to a neighbour's wake, his own death took place on that day, and he was waked himself on the following day. So now is maybe a time, to remember him and to remember all of those who fell and who died in that bloody period of our history. So thanks for watching, and join us again for more Tipperary history in the near future. And we're to be found on Facebook at Tipperary TIPPWOITOURS and Tipperary War of Independence Tour on Facebook. Thank you.